On a busy evening in Fairfield, a powerful businessman collapsed in the middle of the street as dozens of people stood by in silence. But a 6-year-old girl with nothing more than a stuffed puppy in her backpack ran forward without fear. And what she did next would change both of their lives forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us where you are watching from. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Now, let's jump into the story. The late afternoon sun stretched across the streets of Fairfield, painting the sidewalks in soft gold and orange. The town was alive with the hum of traffic and the chatter of people finishing their day. Shadows of tall buildings touched the cracked pavement, and the air carried the warm smell of asphalt. It was an ordinary scene, yet within minutes, it would turn into something unforgettable. Emma Clark, a 6-year-old girl with curious brown eyes, skipped along the sidewalk. Her small pink backpack bounced behind her, and from the half-open zipper, a stuffed puppy peeked out, its floppy ear brushing against her side. Emma's humming filled the air, a little tune her teacher had taught her earlier that morning. For her, the world was simple and bright, a place where kindness was natural and safety was certain. Across the street, Daniel Roberts stepped out of a sleek black car. His tall frame was dressed in a fine suit. His shoes polished, his tie perfectly in place. Then came the screech of brakes, the sharp blast of a car horn, and the angry shouts of drivers swerving to avoid him. Some pedestrians slowed down, their eyes fixed on the man in the expensive suit lying helpless on the pavement. A few whispered, wondering if he had drunk too much, while others simply stepped around him, unwilling to get involved. But on the corner, Emma had stopped in her tracks, her wide eyes locked onto the fallen man. She was only 6, but her heart told her something that many adults around her ignored. Someone needed help. Without thinking about danger or hesitation, she gripped her stuffed puppy tight in one hand and dashed toward the crosswalk. Her little shoes slapped against the pavement as she hurried across the street. Horns blared, but she didn't stop. When she reached Daniel, she dropped to her knees beside him. "Mister, wake up," she said in a trembling voice. Her small hands shook as she touched his arm, giving it a gentle push. His eyelids flickered, but no words came. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Emma's backpack slid from her shoulders as she pulled it open. Inside was a half-filled water bottle her mother had packed for her. She unscrewed the cap quickly and tilted it toward Daniel's lips, whispering, "Please drink." A trickle of water touched his mouth, and his throat moved faintly, swallowing on instinct. Her little heart pounded as she looked around at the cars edging past and the people still watching without action. Anger welled in her tiny voice. "Help! Somebody help him!" she shouted with all the strength she had. For a terrifying moment, nobody moved. Then the roar of a motorcycle cut through the air. A man in a leather jacket stopped abruptly, jumped off, and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance," he said quickly. Emma stayed right where she was, her tiny hand now gripping Daniel's larger one. "It's okay, mister," she whispered. "You'll be fine. I'm here." The sound of sirens grew louder, weaving through the noise of the street. Emma leaned closer, her soft voice carrying more courage than her years. She refused to leave his side. When the paramedics arrived, they worked fast, lifting Daniel onto a stretcher. But even as they carried him toward the ambulance, Emma walked beside them, holding his hand until the very last moment before the doors closed. Standing on the curb, clutching her stuffed puppy to her chest, Emma watched the ambulance disappear into the distance. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know his name. She only knew that someone needed help, and she had given it. Little did she realize that single act of courage would change both their lives forever. 2 days passed after the ambulance carried the businessman away from the busy street. In a quiet hospital room, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor filled the air. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, falling across clean white sheets. The man slowly opened his eyes, his chest still heavy, but his breath steadier than before. His loyal assistant sat nearby, relief spreading across his tired face. "You fainted in the middle of the road," he explained gently. "Many people saw, but no one helped, except a little girl. She stayed with you until the ambulance arrived." The man's eyes widened in disbelief. A child. His voice was weak, but his heart swelled with gratitude. He had been surrounded by strangers who had looked away, yet it was a 6-year-old girl who had rushed to his side. He closed his eyes for a moment, the memory faint but powerful. Tiny hands, a trembling voice, and a bottle of water pressed to his lips. He knew then he needed to find her. A few days later, his sleek black car pulled into a modest neighborhood far from the glass towers of the city. The houses were small but neat, their gardens touched by spring blooms. Children played with chalk on the sidewalk, while neighbors waved from porch. The scene felt far removed from the world of contracts and skyscrapers that usually defined his days. He stepped out of the car, his navy suit sharp against the simplicity of the street. In one hand, he carried a bouquet of white flowers. In the other, a pink gift bag with a carefully chosen present inside. As he walked up the path to the small house, the sound of his polished shoes on the pavement echoed softly. He knocked gently. For a moment, silence lingered. Then the door creaked open, and a woman in her early 30s appeared. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her clothes were plain, but her eyes carried warmth mixed with caution. She froze when she saw the man on her doorstep. She recognized his face. Most people in town did. "Can I help you?" she asked carefully. He smiled, his voice calm and sincere. "Your daughter saved my life. I wanted to thank her." The woman blinked in surprise, unsure what to say. Then a small head peeked from behind her leg. It was the girl, her brown curls slightly messy, her hazel eyes wide with curiosity. She clutched her worn stuffed puppy tightly to her chest, half hiding, half peeking at the visitor. The man knelt down until he was eye level with her. His suit still spoke of wealth, but his expression was gentle, almost humble. "Hello," he said softly. "I heard you were very brave. You helped me when no one else would." The little girl looked at her mother, then back at him. Her lips curved into a shy smile. He reached into the gift bag and pulled out a small box wrapped with a white ribbon. He opened it carefully to reveal a delicate silver bracelet engraved with her name. "This is for you," he said. "It's just a small way to say thank you." Her eyes widened, wonder shining across her face. She reached out hesitantly, touching the bracelet with tiny fingers as though afraid it might vanish. The woman at the door spoke softly, her voice filled with hesitation. "Sir, you didn't need to." "I know," he interrupted gently, "but I wanted to. And if you'll allow me, I would like to invite you both to lunch. I want to thank you properly." The woman hesitated. Her life was filled with bills, long hours, and secondhand clothes. The world of fine restaurants and crystal glasses did not belong to her. She opened her mouth to refuse politely, but before she could speak, the girl tugged at her hand. "Please, Mommy," the child whispered, her eyes sparkling with hope. The mother looked down at her daughter, then back at the man standing patiently before her. There was no arrogance in his eyes, only sincerity. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. The man's smile deepened. "Thank you," he said. As he rose to his feet, the sunlight fell across the three of them, illuminating the moment. What had started as a frightening day on the street was turning into something new. A bond built not on wealth or status, but on kindness and gratitude. None of them could yet see how far this bond would take them, but in that quiet exchange, on the doorstep of a small, weathered house, their lives had already begun to change forever. The city skyline glowed as the evening sun dipped low, and inside the tallest restaurant in Fairfield, chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 stars. The air smelled of fresh flowers and warm bread, and every detail of the place whispered wealth and elegance. Emma Clark had never stepped into such a world before. Her small hand clung to her mother's as she entered the grand hall with wide eyes. Marble floors reflected the golden light above, and heavy curtains swayed softly by the tall windows that overlooked the city below. From this height, cars looked like toys, and people like tiny dots moving along silver streets. Daniel Roberts, the businessman she had once saved, walked proudly beside them. Though he was a man known for power and fortune, tonight his smile was softer, warmer. He had invited Emma and her mother, Grace, to dinner, not to impress them, but to thank them. And for Emma, the evening felt like stepping into a storybook. They were guided to a round table covered in a white cloth that shimmered under the lights. Golden plates and polished silver forks were arranged neatly, each one shining like treasure. Emma reached out with curious fingers, tracing the cool edge of the plate before looking up at her mother in wonder. "Is it all ours to use?" she whispered. Daniel chuckled, picking up the smallest fork and placing it gently in her hand. "Yes, little one, but don't worry about rules. Tonight is about enjoying yourself." Emma grinned shyly and glanced toward the tall windows again, her reflection glowing in the glass. She felt like a princess who had somehow been invited into a castle. As the meal began, Daniel surprised Grace by not speaking about business or numbers. Instead, he leaned toward Emma and asked her simple but important questions. "What is your favorite game? What is your favorite animal? What color do you love most?" Emma giggled between bites of warm bread. "I like hopscotch. I like cats, but only the nice ones, not the scary ones. And I love the color blue." Daniel smiled, as though her answers were more valuable than any deal he had ever made. Then he asked, "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" Emma straightened in her chair, her small voice full of pride. "I want to be a nurse, so I can help people like I helped you." The table grew quiet for a moment. Daniel's chest tightened with emotion as he remembered lying helpless on the road, only to see her face filled with courage and kindness. "That is a beautiful dream," he said softly, his voice steady. "And I believe you will make it come true." Grace lowered her eyes, touched by how seriously he treated her daughter. She had raised Emma with hope, but she had never seen someone of his world look at her child with such genuine respect. The evening moved on, with laughter and gentle conversation, but beyond the golden walls, whispers began to stir. In offices and boardrooms, in gatherings of powerful investors, questions were already spreading. Why was Daniel, a man of reputation and wealth, spending his time with a single mother and her daughter from the modest side of town? Some called it a distraction. Others feared it would damage his image. That unease followed him into the night of a grand charity event weeks later. The ballroom glittered with crystal lights, and guests in diamonds and tuxedos filled the space with polite laughter. Music drifted from a piano in the corner as waiters carried trays of champagne. Grace stood nervously in a simple dress Daniel had gifted her, while Emma wore a pale blue gown that made her look like a tiny princess. Daniel walked between them, holding their hands with quiet pride. But not all eyes were kind. A man in a white jacket, his voice heavy with mockery, stopped Daniel mid-step. "A leader of business bringing people like them into this world? Interesting choice. His words echoed loudly enough for the crowd to hear. A few chuckles spread through the room. Emma's small hand tightened around Daniel's. She looked up, her hazel eyes wide with worry. "Did I make them mad at you?" she whispered. Daniel bent to her level, the room falling silent around them. He smiled gently, though his eyes carried determination. "No, Emma, you made me proud. You walked into this room and brought more light than it has ever seen." He lifted his gaze to the man and the crowd. "Some people think wealth is only about money, but I have learned true wealth is about the people you choose to keep close." Grace's eyes glistened as she listened, her heart pounding at his defense of her daughter. The man in the white jacket shifted uneasily, his smirk fading beneath Daniel's steady voice. One by one, the onlookers turned away, embarrassed by their silence. The music swelled once more, and Daniel rose, taking Emma's hand in his and Grace's hand in the other. "Come," he said warmly. "Let's find the dessert table together." Emma's face lit with joy, her worries gone. And as they walked across the ballroom, she whispered, "Someday they will understand kindness, right?" Daniel looked down at her, his heart swelling with pride. "Someday, yes. And until then, we will keep showing them what it looks like." The night of the annual company gala arrived with grand fanfare. Chandeliers glittered above the hall like frozen stars, and the polished marble floor reflected the soft glow of golden light. Waiters in black suits carried trays of champagne while a piano played gently in the corner. The event was meant to celebrate success, but for Daniel Roberts, the man once saved by a child's kindness, it was also a chance to show his gratitude for life. Walking into the ballroom with him was Grace, dressed in a pale yellow gown that suited her quiet gracefulness, and Emma, her 6-year-old daughter, glowing in a soft blue dress that made her look like a tiny princess. Her curls bounced as she walked, and clutched in her hand was the same stuffed puppy that had been by her side the day she saved him. The three of them drew attention immediately. Some smiled politely, while others whispered behind crystal glasses. Investors and colleagues, people who valued image above all else, found themselves questioning Daniel's choices. For them, a man of wealth was expected to guard his reputation, not walk proudly into a ballroom with a single mother and her young daughter. At first, Daniel ignored the whispers, focusing only on making Emma feel comfortable. He bent down, often, pointing out the sparkling decorations, answering her endless questions, and even laughing with her when she spun clumsily on the marble floor. But beneath the glitter, tension was building. As the evening wore on, Daniel felt the pressure of the room pressing against him. Every glance, every hushed remark from across the tables seemed sharper than before. Then, one of the older investors approached him, his voice cold, his eyes sharp. "You are risking everything," he muttered. "This woman and her child do not belong here. End it before it destroys your image." The words cut deep, but before Daniel could respond, a familiar heaviness pressed against his chest. His vision blurred, and the chandelier lights above seemed too bright. He excused himself quickly and stepped onto the balcony, gasping for air. The cool night breeze brushed against his face, but it did little to steady him. His breaths came short and uneven, his hand clutching at his chest. The pressure grew, and for a moment he feared he might collapse again. Inside the ballroom, Emma had been chasing her stuffed puppy after it slipped from her grasp. She stopped suddenly when she saw Daniel through the open balcony doors, leaning against the railing, his body trembling. Without hesitation, she ran. Her tiny shoes tapped quickly against the marble as she darted past startled guests. When she reached him, she grabbed his hand tightly, her small fingers wrapping around his much larger ones. "Look at me," she said firmly, her voice filled with more courage than her years. "Just breathe, in and out like this." She placed her other hand gently on his chest and began to guide him. Slow, mister, just slow. Daniel's breaths were shaky, but her steady voice cut through the fog clouding his mind. He focused on her wide hazel eyes, filled not with fear, but determination. Little by little, his breathing steadied, the pounding in his chest easing. Grace rushed toward them, her face pale with fear, but when she saw her daughter holding him calm and strong, her heart filled with pride. She stood back, tears glistening in her eyes, watching as Emma helped him in a way no doctor, no assistant, no investor ever could. When Daniel finally straightened, he still held Emma's hand like a lifeline. His voice was rough, but full of emotion. "You saved me again," he whispered. Emma grinned, her curls catching the glow of the moonlight. "I guess I'm really good at it now," she said proudly. Grace stepped closer, resting her hand on his shoulder. "She has always been good at it," she said softly. Inside the ballroom, guests had gathered at the doorway, watching silently. Daniel turned, still holding Emma's hand. He walked back into the room with her at his side, and Grace close behind. The music stopped, and all eyes were on him. With calm determination, he raised his voice. "This little girl saved my life, not once, but twice." She did not see money or status. She saw a person in need and acted with courage. That is the kind of strength and kindness the world should honor. A hush fell across the hall. Many lowered their eyes, ashamed of their silence in moments that had mattered most. In the weeks that followed, Daniel launched the Emma Clark Scholarship Fund, giving opportunities to children from struggling families. Grace no longer carried the weight of endless shifts, and Emma grew up knowing her small acts of courage had reshaped not just one man's life, but the lives of many others. The story closed not in a grand office or under glittering chandeliers, but in the warmth of a home where love and kindness reigned. Because true wealth is not measured in money or reputation, but in compassion freely given. Sometimes the smallest hands carry the greatest strength, and a single act of courage can remind the world what it truly means to be human.